DICE might be dropping off a couple of Battlefield 5 Christmas gifts for us in the form of a couple of new weapons, including the 1897 Trent shotgun, as well as the Ribby Rolls from Battlefield 1 making its return. But the real Christmas miracle here is that DICE is rolling back their very controversial changes to Battlefield 5's gunplay, which they just introduced last week. And I know that for a lot of the outraged community, there was a decent amount of fear that this change was going to be permanent. Thankfully it's not, but today I want to dig into what they changed and why I'm really glad they changed it back. For all of its flaws and all the controversy surrounding its marketing campaign, Battlefield 5 always had at least one thing going for it from the beta all the way through launch, and that's its fantastic gunplay. The weapon handling in Battlefield 5, while not quite sim level, definitely had a slight hint of hardcore in it. The time to kill was pretty quick, and generally, positioning and the element of surprise were huge. And for the most part, the community loved this more hardcore approach.
Yeah, watch out, there's no one.
It's an oblivious medic. Unfortunately, this more unforgiving style of gunplay is not kind to new players, especially as a lot of the current player base has been playing a bunch of hours since launch over that staggered launch, and we've also seen some slight server issues across Battlefield 5 in the recent weeks, resulting in a faster time to death than should be the case. You end up taking all of your damage in just 1 or 2 frames on your client, making it feel like you got shot with 10 bullets at once with no time to react. This is a pretty complex issue though, because again, you have some slight server issues making the time to death too sudden and giving all players too little time to react, but you also have people not noticing the attrition system and not realizing that perhaps they've already healed once with their health pack, and perhaps now their health is at a maximum of 60, and they don't realize it, and they run out from cover and get shot with just a couple of bullets because they didn't realize they weren't at full health. I know that from my perspective, as I'm killing players sometimes with just 1 or 2 shots, it's really quite unexpected. I think there are a lot of players who don't quite understand the attrition system and who are blaming lag for a death that in reality was just their low health.
Good work. We have taken objective box.
Apparently, because of this, DICE was having a big problem with player churn. They actually came out and talked about this, which is an unusual step. They explained that their metrics showed that a lot of players were getting frustrated with how fast they were dying, and they were not logging back into the game. Unfortunately, for the very dedicated player base that is enjoying the game right now, DICE's solution was to increase the time to kill as a band-aid to try and get new players to hop back in, or just not to get frustrated and quit in the first place. To try and accomplish this with only a day's warning, DICE completely changed how weapons felt in the game by lowering the damage of all of the weapons in the game. This has been the case for about the last week, and suddenly you have classes like the Medic, which were already struggling to deal with both LMGs and assault weapons, being essentially completely worthless at any range. SMGs were taking a ridiculous amount of rounds to kill. Everything just felt spongier, and if you enjoyed those semi-automatic weapons, well, unfortunately, you were going to have to land hit marker after hit marker to get a kill, unless you're just landing consistent headshots. With practice, I found that I could do okay with a new time to kill, but I really had a hard time guessing when I should stop firing. Having played 80 hours of what felt like a different game or different game mode, it was very hard to adjust to the changes, which right off the bat was a huge negative for me. Here's a couple of examples of just how kind of annoying, especially the mid-range and ranged combat could be. Here's a look at the Medic class before the patch, before DICE's wayward temporary experiment, if you will.
Oof, 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 oof. Run, run, run.
There is a lot of people that are still
Right, I'm down. I'm down behind sandbags. Yep.
And here it is with those time to kill changes.
Bleib ganz ruhig. Bin ja da.
And while that might be a little frustrating to watch, I can really tell you that it was not very satisfying to play at all, especially having played over 80 hours of the original game and really enjoying how the gunplay in that version felt. While that slightly less forgiving time to kill that Battlefield 5 launched with can be rough on new players or players who tend to be a bit Rambo-like, and I can be guilty of that myself, charging to the objective, I love that the base game's time to kill that DICE is returning to really puts an emphasis on positioning. In a lot of games, people like to call it camping, but if I'm listening for footsteps, I'm defending an objective, and I'm trying to manage threats, and I'm using all of my senses and knowledge of the map to try and take out as many enemies as possible, I want to feel like my weapon is up to the task and can output the damage that I need it to come out on top if I've put that effort in to find a good position and pay attention to my surroundings. The original time to kill might have been high risk, but it was definitely high reward. It just felt good. Again, I think the focus should be on improving the time to death, improving the netcode and the server response time, and helping to educate players on the attrition system and how to manage their health and how to play more carefully, and help new players come to grips with how much things have changed in the core gameplay here in Battlefield 5 before trying to just throw a band-aid over the whole gunplay system. The good news is, as I'm recording this, DICE has rolled back all of those changes, and our gunplay is now back to exactly how it was at launch. This is such a relief to me. I actually have only played about 2 hours since these changes went into effect, and that's after about 80 hours over the course of the launch month. I was really enjoying the game, and things were starting to look up for the future with a solid base in the gunplay elements, and suddenly DICE just pulled the rug out from the base game. I was honestly just so frustrated both with the changes and with the lack of communication before they dropped. But again, the good news is they have heard us. They've seen the metrics as well. People were not happy with this change, and apparently it really didn't help new players either, so those time to kill changes are being rolled back. There are so many elements in Battlefield 5 that could use polishing. You have broken assignments, you have broken progress bars on the Tides of War campaign, where you're trying to earn XP and unlock these Tides of War event items. You still have a very long time to exit a match, and you have pretty frequent UI and HUD lockups and issues where things just stop responding and you have to restart the game. There's a lot of rough edges that I think play a lot more into player frustration and player churn, as they called it, than how the gunplay feels. Again, we have more additional good news though. DICE is working to improve both server performance. They're also actively working to improve the kill cam, and that alone I think would really go far to improving players' reaction to the game. And I think that change alone, a more informational kill cam that would explain to a player exactly how they got killed, would go a long way to reducing frustration. Our current kill cam is very vague, and I understand that DICE does not want to just point out enemies on the kill cam for this battlefield, given that the gunplay is a little bit more hardcore, but just showing you some stats like you took this much damage on this arm and this leg and then up to the chest, but you also were being shot from behind by this guy that added to the damage. Just a better breakdown to help players understand what's happening to them would really help, I think. There are some additional quality of life improvements coming, like a ton of improvements to both vaulting and ledge grabbing, and that's another area where I think both new and old players alike are going to get very frustrated, just because your character model gets stuck on so much stuff trying to move around the world right now. We have improvements being worked on right now in that department. They're also working on improvements to soldier animations and consistency, which will help with tracking players as you're aiming at them. From my experience, the player tracking and player movement became even more obnoxious when the time to kill changes were temporarily added, because with the additional health and time to react that players had, there was a huge increase from my experience in both bunny hopping and AD-AD left-right strafing spam. Once people realized that, hey, I have basically free extra time to react, I'm just going to spam control keys until the person shooting at me is out of ammo, and then fire back at my leisure. It was a really obnoxious style of gameplay returning from Battlefield 1, and that's a style of gunplay that I really don't miss, even as much as I enjoyed Battlefield 1 myself. Going forward, I hope that DICE tries to test the waters a bit more before completely changing the base game itself. I know a lot of players, myself included, were just very, very irritated with the suddenness of this change, and also the fact that, in our opinion, it was a negative change. But I felt like the 80 hours that I'd already put into the game were in a different game all of a sudden. That may sound a bit overdramatic, but for me, the gunplay really is the thing that's keeping me here in Battlefield 5 and waiting for that additional content. I do have high hopes for the Tides of War, but I think the game that we have right now is really just a jumping off point. It does feel like there's a lot of content and polish missing, so please, let's have the gunplay just stay solid so we can enjoy it as we wait for more content. Hopefully we're going to see continued improvements for Battlefield 5, but in a more measured and careful direction, instead of changing so much at once.